while the whole world is watching the opening and closing of Strait of Hormuz. The real story is taking shape behind the scenes in the banking system where no one is looking. Last week, Repo fail jumped to $415 billion for that week, and it's a big deal. Now, before I get to why repo fails matter and why specifically $415 billion is troublesome, let's quickly define repo and repo fails. So what really is repo, or otherwise known as repo transaction? Think of repo or repo transactions as the oil that keeps the financial markets running smoothly. Not one asset, all asset classes. This is how all asset classes tie together. It's the lubricant that keeps the monetary system intact.
One of the biggest concerns in the financial markets in 2019 was something known as the repo market. This was one of the major reasons for the Federal Reserve starting once again to pump money into the financial system.
In a repo transaction, one party lends cash in exchange of securities, usually US treasuries. These are safest of the safest assets. And this transaction is usually for overnight to another party. Both parties sort of agrees to reverse the transaction the next day.
The repo market is often referred to as the plumbing of the financial system. And just like the plumbing in your home, you're unlikely to think about how it operates each day until something goes wrong with it. But this is a market that has a turnover of $1 to $2 trillion per day. So it's pretty big. Repo stands for repurchase agreement and is basically a form of short-term borrowing where securities, and especially government securities, are used as collateral. The reason it's called a repurchase agreement rather than just a collateralized loan is down to the way the transaction is done.
Now, I know it's not very simple, but please stick with me. Let's take a simple example. Assume I need some cash urgently. I go to my friend's house, I give him my FIFA 24 video game as collateral and borrow $100 from him. He agrees with me and asks for 2% interest overnight. Deal done? Tomorrow, I go back to him, I return his $100 plus $2 interest as we agreed on, and I get my FIFA 24 video game back. That's a repo transaction for you. Financial institutions do this every single day. They use repo constantly. Hedge funds and dealer borrows cash quickly when they need the liquidity. So repo market is essentially a short-term secured loan market that greases the wheels of daily finance.
Essentially, the repo market is like a huge pawn shop. That's pawn with a W. So, let's say you have Bank A, which is holding a lot of cash, more than they need, and you have Bank B that has some treasury bonds but needs to raise cash. In a repurchase agreement, Bank B will sell its treasury bonds to Bank A, but the agreement will state that Bank B will repurchase the treasury bonds back from Bank A at a later point in time for a higher price.
Typically, the system works well, and the people who borrow those treasuries return them on time to each other. No problem. But every now and then, especially at the times of stress, the lender, and I emphasize the lender, fails to deliver the treasuries back to the borrower. Meaning the borrower is ready to return the cash borrowed plus interest, but the lender does not have the treasury to return back, or simply does not want to return the treasuries back. Yep, this is what we call the repo fails. During repo fails, the lender is short of collateral himself. You might ask, how is that even possible? They have the collateral. They simply need to return it back. And that's exactly the problem. This is where you enter the rehypothecation problem. Basically, the root cause is usually the collateral hoarding in the collateral chain, where at the times of stress, and I emphasize the time of stress, dealers prefer to keep high quality treasuries on their books rather than lend them out or to return them to the borrower. And this creates the jam in the system.
The party that's lending the money, in this case Bank A, will be institutions such as banks and money market funds. The borrowers, Bank B, will be institutions like investment banks, hedge funds and brokers. The Federal Reserve will also be involved in the repo market to help regulate bank reserves and the money supply.
This is exactly what happened in 2008, 2019, 2020, and also 2022. In those episodes, repo fails spiked dramatically. Near 2.7 trillion followed the Lehman collapse in 2008. Massive settlement disruption in September of 2019. If you remember the banking crisis in 2019, over 300 to 500 billion dollars weekly in the peak of March 2020 during the COVID crisis.
The Fed coming off a big test in its efforts to calm the short-term funding market. Dom Chu joins us now with the latest on the Fed's repo operations. Hi, Dom.
All right, so Courtney, the biggest banks in America tapped the New York Federal Reserve for $63.5 billion worth of overnight cash borrowing via the repurchase or repo market. That was earlier this morning.
So back to our story. Exactly same thing just happened the last week. Repo fails exploded to $415 billion. And that level was more than double the same week last year. A spike like this signals a serious trouble brewing in the banking system. Banks or dealers are hoarding treasuries rather than lending them out, even when required. At least to me, it's a clear sign of hidden stress building in the system, even when the stock market indexes are rallying to all-time highs.